Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Right now, you're going to see two of our lovely members here passing around note cards and pens. Those will be for questions, so if you need one, take one. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for being here. All right, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me now? All right, I'll try and be a little loud, which is a little easy for me. I am from Brockton, so I do apologize if I get too loud. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for Immigration Detention in the Commonwealth, featuring Laura Rotillo, Field Director for the ACLU of Massachusetts, Leah Hastings, Immigrant Detention Conditions Project Legal Fellow and Staff Attorney at Prisoners and Legal Services. We will also hear from Lori Fitzpatrick, co-founder of the Plymouth Community Action with Neighbors, who will be sharing the experiences of an immigrant family currently experiencing the effects of detention within Plymouth County. My name is Celia Canavan, and I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts Board Presidents Courtney Rao Rogers and Courtney Henderson, welcome. I am pleased to be joined tonight by Jen Muroff, our Legislative Action Chair, and members of the Steering Committee of the League of Women Voters of Plymouth. I want to thank Jen and the Plymouth League for their partnership and support to make this event a success. I'd also like to recognize the elected officials in the room. Thank you to Select Board Member Bill Keown and Chair Kevin Canty for being here. And I'd also like to thank you, Deb Iaquinto, for being here as well. This program is being recorded and will be shown on the local scene. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this forum do not reflect the views of the local scene or the town of Plymouth. Tonight, we will learn about immigration detention in the Commonwealth. We are pleased to host Leah Hastings of Prisoners Legal Services and Laura Rotillo of ACLU-MA, as well as Lori Fitzpatrick of We Can, who are experts in the field. We will invite the panelists to introduce themselves in just a moment, but first we would like to review our community norms. At the League, we ask that everyone is kind and respectful, that you bring your full self and limit distractions, and additionally, audience questions will be submitted via index cards. LWV members will collect the cards before the Q&A section. Similarly worded questions will be grouped together to remain mindful of time, and each question will be reviewed by our moderator, Jen. Once you have filled out your index card, please hold it up so members of the League may collect it. At the end of the forum, a QR code will be passed around for you to fill out a feedback form so we may improve our events in the future. Thank you in advance for providing your thoughts. We would also like to invite you to join us for our Day on the Hill Lobby Day next Thursday, September 18th at the State House, as well as for Witness Wednesday, which occurs every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. at the Plymouth County Corrections Center, where we shine a light on the hundreds of men detained who have not been charged with a crime in violation of the Fifth Amendment. LWVMA is nonpartisan in that we do not endorse political parties or candidates. However, we do take positions on issues through thorough study and consensus. To ground us in our work tonight, let's review our positions. In our book, Impact on Issues, on page 167, we have quite a lot of positions. We have the following. The League denounces the incarceration of detainees who have not been charged with any crime in violation of their Fifth Amendment due process rights. The League of Women Voters supports due process for all persons, including the right to a fair hearing, the right to counsel, the right of appeal, and the right to humane treatment, and that no person should suffer legal discrimination. The League does not support deporting these immigrants who have no history of major and/or violent criminal activity. For more information on our positions, Day on the Hill or Witness Wednesdays, please visit our website at www.lwvma.org/advocacy. I'm now pleased to invite our Legislative Action Chair, Jen Miroff, up to the podium.
Thank you, Celia. Can you hear me? Great, awesome. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I've seen many of you at Witness Wednesday. Thank you for being here. So I'm Jen Miroff. I'm the Legislative Action Committee Chair for the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, and we've invited some expert panelists to be with us tonight. So I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves and go into some discussion on some questions. So let's kick it off with Laura Rotolo of ACLU Mass. And I'm wondering, Laura, if you can explain what does ICE detention look like here in the Commonwealth and also across the country?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question, and good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Great. It's great to be with you. What an amazing turnout. You could be anywhere tonight, and you chose to be here, so thank you so much for showing up, for listening so attentively, and so happy to be with you all. What does detention look like? I think this is a very important story to understand. Detention here in Massachusetts, there is one official place, which is at Plymouth County Jail. There are about 500 what they call beds, right? Let's call them jail spaces for immigrant detainees to be held. We know that they cycle through very quickly. The sheriff has said that the people that he sees on Monday are not the same people as he sees on Friday. So because it's a federal system, they are able to be moved anywhere in the country at a moment's notice without letting their attorneys or their families know. People come to Plymouth and then they leave very quickly. Within New England, the Boston Field Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement serves or covers the entire New England area, which includes Maine, Connecticut, Vermont, Rhode Island, and us. Plymouth used to be one of the largest spaces in New England. It had about 50 beds at the beginning of the year, and it's like up to 500 now. But because Congress has given ICE the largest, and like I cannot exaggerate the amount of growth in detention that we're seeing now, $45 billion in the last budget, in this big, beautiful bill, $45 billion for immigration detention. At the beginning of the year, there were about 40,000 spaces available daily. There will have 107,000 spaces available every day for detention across the country. Detention has increased all throughout the New England region. So Plymouth is now just one piece of about, 2,000 beds that are coming online around this time, and perhaps more, new ones in New Hampshire and all over the place. And I think it's a really important piece of policy to be aware of, that our tax dollars are going to fund the deportation machine through detention and other forms of enforcement.
And could you explain, actually, Laura, before we go on to Leah and talk about the conditions at Plymouth, could you explain, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about when people are picked up and brought to Burlington, and could you give us, the basics, like how people are picked up and how they're processed?
Right, and I think, Leah, you should speak to this as
Great.
well.
Okay.
You've got the clients. So maybe Leah should handle that one, right?
Sure. Just making sure you can hear me as well. So I'm seeing nods. A little louder? Okay, I'll speak a little louder, but not be super close to the mic so I don't give you all earaches. Towards me? Okay. Is this all right for you all? Okay, super. So my name's Leah Hastings. I am an attorney at Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts. We're a legal services organization that serves incarcerated people across the state of Massachusetts. And I focus on immigration detention as well as immigrants who are incarcerated in county jails and state prisons. So you were wanting to review a little bit, like, how is it that people end up at Plymouth?
Great.
This has historically taken a few different paths. So prior to the current administration, it was largely a mix of three things. One being people who were picked up near the southern border or at the northern border and transferred to Plymouth and held there, who had just recently crossed. Second would have been people who were, picked up in the community. This was a little bit less frequently, but oftentimes people who were attending court hearings or were, arrested and kind of at the beginning stages of the criminal legal process. And ended up in ICE custody through that before they could see their charges through. And then the third is typically people who are finishing up a sentence that they've been serving at the county or the state level, and instead of going back to their families and their communities, typically ICE will pick them up and bring them to ICE detention that way. So in each of those circumstances, people are taken into ICE custody, typically booked in at Burlington, meaning like they take their fingerprints, get all their information, and then they get transported to Plymouth, where they would remain for, depending on their eligibility for release, anywhere from a few days or weeks to multiple years on end. And so kind of the shift that we've seen a little bit in the past 8 months is that, as I understand it, we're not really getting people from the border anymore. And, the folks who have been picked up attending their court hearings or at the end of their sentences or upon being granted parole, that has remained pretty consistent. But instead of getting a large number of people transferred up from the border, from New Mexico, from Texas, and other border states, or down from northern Maine, northern New Hampshire, Vermont, we're seeing a lot more people who are being picked up in their communities here in Massachusetts. And so that has really been the largest expansion of people detained at Plymouth. And the biggest shift that we've seen in the past 8 months or so. A lot of people being, picked up at traffic stops, people getting picked up on their way to work, people getting picked up at work, people getting picked up dropping their kids off at school. And so that has really been a pretty dramatic change in how we see people coming into ICE detention at Plymouth. So, the booking process, people going to Burlington and coming to Plymouth, looks pretty much the same, no matter where you're coming in from. I guess another change that is worth mentioning with regards to Burlington is that people did not used to be detained at Burlington. It's an office building. It is where, ICE does the business office side of things. It is not a space that is meant to detain people. And one, pretty horrifying change that has taken place in the last few months is that ICE has started holding people at the Burlington field office for longer periods of time in really deplorable conditions. And so that's something that advocates are, continuing to keep an eye on. I believe Lawyers for Civil Rights may have filed some litigation related to the conditions at the Burlington field office for people being held there. And typically it's not for long periods of time. I think I read the average was about 5 days. But yeah, I can't overstate how terrible the conditions have been reported there. So any appreciable period of time is, entirely too long for a space like that.
Could you share some examples about what you've heard about the conditions there?
Yeah, I've heard from a colleague who was representing a woman detained there that, no access to medical care, you know, no like feminine hygiene supplies, and yeah, just a lot of people crowded into one space, a lot of people not understanding what was going on because things weren't being explained to them in a way that they could understand. So, you know, some of these are unfortunately commonalities across the detention system, but, you know, in a space and under circumstances like this, it's just like particularly stark, you know, the things that people are going through while detained in that space. I don't know if you have any more anecdotes, Laura.
If I may just add, not an anecdote, but zooming out a little
Yeah.
bit to Leah's point about the change of what they're seeing of who's getting booked into Plymouth, I just want to remind us all, zooming out, immigration detention is not supposed to be criminal detention, right? People who are in immigration detention are there because the government is trying to deport them, or they're fighting to stay. They may have committed a crime in the past, they may not, may have zero criminal record. If they have committed a crime in the past, they've probably served their time or you know, gone through that criminal justice procedure. They're in a county jail because that's who's renting space to ICE. But these are people who are being held on purely civil immigration laws, not criminal laws. And so that's important to have as context, and that one of the changes, the fundamental changes, and I can't overstate how fundamental this change is, that we're seeing under this administration is about who's getting picked up to be deported. It is not just people who are undocumented. It is not just people who have committed crimes. It's people who are in the middle of, you know, a process to apply for a visa, to apply for status. It's people who are showing up to court as they're supposed to because they're in the process of getting status. It's people who have TPS, as you will hear later, people who have temporary protected status. That's going to be ripped away from them. So the way that this government is handling immigrants is very, very different. They're not just going after the worst of the worst, that they say, and they're not even just going after undocumented people. They're going after as many people as they can in order to meet their 3,000 a day quota for arrests.
Thank you, Laura. I'm really glad you brought that up. Department of Homeland Security data indicates 85% of people detained have not committed any crime whatsoever, and that's why we are standing out at Witness Wednesday to shine a light on this. And we are very concerned about that because that's in violation of the Fifth Amendment, and we want to do everything we can to shine a light on that. Lori, I'd love to invite you now to share a statement and introduce yourself and share a statement.
Hi, I'm Lori Fitzpatrick, and myself and my partner have just started a grassroots organization called Together We Can, Community Action with Neighbors, and we're working with faith communities in Plymouth and organizations in Plymouth that are committed to social justice and mutual aid. We're working with our immigrant neighbors here in Plymouth, providing mutual aid and support to families who are affected by detention and directly in detention. So I just want to relay a story that just came to us, a woman and a family that we're helping from Haiti.
Lori, before you begin, I just want to ask you to pull the mic closer so everyone can hear you. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
That's
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
All right. So this woman's name is Betty, and her husband, Jean France, and her fled from traumatic physical, financial, emotional, and sexual abuse in Haiti. Betty herself was raped several times by gangs in Haiti. And they fled Haiti in 2016. They had one child at that time who was 8 years old. And they traveled by foot and by bus to French New Guinea. And there, they stayed for some time, and they traveled through South and Central America, eventually making their way to Colombia, where they crossed one of the most treacherous and dangerous landscapes in America, in the Americas, the Darien Gap. This is a hellish journey through unruly wilderness, mountains, and jungle, filled with dangerous and deadly wildlife. It's a walk of about 580 miles. and they did this with their child. They walked across dense and thick vegetation, swamps filled with mosquitoes, deadly insects, reptiles. If anyone's been to the jungle, which I have as a tourist, you can get an idea of the kind of thing that we're talking about. 580 miles of that without a guide. I've done it with a guide. Finally, the family did reach Panama, and from there they traveled again by bus, by boat, and by foot across the Mexican desert to the United States border in Texas. So this type of journey is reminiscent of our own ancestors, if we really think about it. Migrating from their homelands, crossing oceans, land, starving for prosperity and justice for their children, and a unique freedom that only the democracy of the United States provides. A democracy that's slipping through our fingertips now. We know this story, we know it well. We've heard it in the voices of our grandparents and our great-grandparents who have fled their homelands yearning for a better life, in which we're now benefactors of. My own great-grandmother left Poland in 1915. She sailed across the ocean. She was 16. She was pregnant. And she landed in Ellis Island and eventually settled in Pennsylvania, where she had 9 children. These are my ancestors, and without them, I would not be who I am and where I am today. And we all have a story like this in our family. This is Betty's story. Excuse me. So I've been working very closely with Betty, so I'm feeling her pain. Betty arrived in Plymouth with no home, no money, no opportunity. In our great state of Massachusetts, which I'm very proud to be a resident of these days, provided her with shelter, resources, provided her with housing, a way to begin anew. Such hope for Betty and her family. And by this time, Betty and Jean now had 3 children, all girls, 1, 5, and 17. Betty stayed home, raised her kids, while Jean France worked many hours at a local grocery store and restaurant here in Plymouth to provide for their family. They lived in a homeless shelter, which closed at the end of June. And during the transition of moving, they were mailed a letter to appear in court due to their temporary protective status. When Jean France was picking up the oldest daughter on August 17th from work at 12 a.m., he was pulled over and arrested because he was issued a
Traffic violations.
a warrant. Yeah. So the next day, the authorities took him to Plymouth Courthouse to be tried and to be given his due process, which is a constitutional guarantee that ensures fair treatment through judicial system protecting the individual from arbitrary government action, right? This is our foundation. While awaiting a court-appointed translator, because he speaks Haitian Creole, for his case to be heard, ICE was stalking the courtroom and was heard by a local bystander, "How are we going to catch him?" At the recess, and they snatched him from the courthouse, illegally detained him with no due process or explanation. They shackled his wrists, his ankles, and they took him to the Plymouth County Correctional Facility, where he was held for 12 days, and before being transferred to Berlin, where he is now in New Hampshire, 2 days ago. So since that time, I met with Betty on Saturday, and the organization that I'm working with, we have done so much to help her. It's been very hopeful. So we were delivering furniture and some diapers and things, and she told me that she met the lawyer that morning and her case is, quote, closed. And she also said to me, quote, "I'm scared for myself and my girls. My daughter's afraid to attend school, and I don't want to be taken too.
Thank you for sharing that, Lori, and thank you for your work in keeping Betty safe and her family safe right now. Thank you. Laura or Leah, would you like to comment on that experience? No. No. Speaks for itself. Speaks for itself. Thank you, Lori.
I mean, a few of the things that jump out is this snatching people in courthouses, right, in the middle of a process. The temporary protected status. Haiti is a place that is very difficult to return to right now.
Okay.
Oh,
Sorry.
is that better? Okay. A few of the things that jump out at me is this interrupting of the judicial process, right? As ICE is picking people up in the middle of a process. Then, of course, Haiti is a very difficult place to return to right now. And the fact that this man is set to be deported back to Haiti is really unconscionable.
We're throwing around a lot of terms, so I'd love it if you could break down just some of the alphabet soup, so 287G versus IGSA and all the, maybe break it down because people aren't, I'm reading about it every day and I still get confused, so I'm wondering if if Leah or Laura could speak to that a little bit.
I can start with those two terms. So TPS, we'll just go with that one, is temporary protected status, and it is a status that the U.S. government gives to certain groups of people who cannot return to their place of origin because of war, famine, things of this nature. El Salvador, Venezuela, Venezuela is one of them, right? Yeah. Haiti are some of the top ones that our government gives this status to because the conditions there are so difficult to return to. The other two that you mentioned are the IGSA, which is a contract the government signs with a place like a jail to rent out space. And then the other one is what's called a 287G agreement. It's just about the section of the law that it refers to. But what these are really ways for local officials, state officials to volunteer their resources to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to the federal deportation machine. For example, the 287G Pact is a pact that allows a local official to be deputized with with federal powers to act as an immigration agent. That is a force multiplier for ICE, and in fact, they have used that word. Tom Homan stood in front of the National Sheriff's Association and said to them, to the sheriffs in the room, we need your 287Gs and we need your bed spaces as force multipliers. That is how they are going to reach their 3,000 daily arrest quota, by enticing, coercing local governments to help. We don't have to do that. The 10th Amendment, the anti-commandeering part of the Constitution, says that the federal government cannot force a state or a city or a county to do the federal government's job for them. We don't have to help out. We can't obstruct, we can't make their work harder, but we certainly do not need to make it any easier for them. And that 287G agreement has become one of the main ways that the federal government increases its capacity to act. And so on January 19th of this year, there were 135 of those pacts around the state. We're about to hit 1,000. We are at 956 as of today. As you can imagine, most of those are in sort of red states, southern states. Florida has a ton of them, and they are proliferating around New England as well. There's about a dozen new ones in New Hampshire, one in Maine, and it's only a matter of time before some county or city in Massachusetts is coerced or enticed into signing one of those, making their police force also ICE agents. We are very much against that, and we hope that you will help us. There are several bills at the state legislature that would ban that. We want to make sure that that is also banned at a local level, whether politically or as an ordinance. So there are many ways for you to get involved to do that. We absolutely do not want our state to be the ones that are helping this deportation machine.
I just want to ask everyone to actually speak as close to your microphone as possible. Folks in the back are having trouble hearing. I don't know if it would help for you to come sit up here. It might be easier for you to hear. If anyone wants to come forward and sit along the side here. It might be easier for you to hear, but I'll ask everyone to speak as closely into their microphone as possible. So Laura, you raise a great point. I thought 287G was illegal in Massachusetts because of the Lund decision. Could you talk about that?
No, 287Gs are not illegal in Massachusetts.
Great.
In fact, we have one of those contracts, and that is with the Department of Corrections. This is a longstanding contract where we believe it's one person at the DOC who is an administrator and helps ICE make sure that they take into their custody people who are wrapping up a DOC sentence, a Department of Corrections sentence. So these are the state prisons. We have one contract, and we are definitely, looking out to make sure that other cities, counties, jails, police departments don't sign anymore. Do you want to say more about that 287G?
Sure, yeah, because I do work with a lot of folks who are incarcerated in the Mass Department of Corrections. And yeah, this has been a subject of a lot of interest for me. It's also been something that's been quite challenging to get information about. And, the way that the DOC and ICE work together is in several ways. Basically, the DOC will, help ICE to identify people who might be deportable, and then also coordinates with ICE at the end of someone's sentence. So someone has, wrapped up serving their prison sentence, or if someone is released on parole. We've had a lot of people released on parole lately since the Mattis decision, which said that emerging adults, so adults, I have to, the exact age, it's like under the age of 22 or 21, cannot be sentenced to life without parole. And so because of that decision, a lot of people who were convicted when they were young people and have spent many, many years in prison are now able to get parole. And those people among this cohort who are not U.S. citizens, who are, were legal permanent residents, many of them came here as children, some of them came here as refugees. Those folks, instead of returning home to their communities the way that their U.S. citizen counterparts are, they're being subject to an additional incarceration, and then, facing deportation proceedings, and often being taken out of communities that they've known as their own for most of their lives. So this is, the reality that the DOC's 287G exists in and is a part of.
Thank you. And so for folks, we at the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, we are in coalition with hundreds of organizations around the state to pass the Protecting Our Immigrant Communities campaign. And there are 3 bills: the Safe Communities Act, the Immigrant Legal Defense Fund, which was funded in the House budget, but we want that codified as well, and also the Dignity.Deportations Act, and the Safe Communities Act, and thank you. The Safe Communities Act and Dignity.Deportations have that common thread of banning 287G agreements. So that is something we are focusing on at our lobby day and as part of the campaign. Did you want to add anything to that, Laura?
I would just say, imagine you are in a city or a county where they have signed one of these pacts. You get pulled over by a police officer. That police officer is also acting on behalf of ICE, right? So they can ask you questions about your immigration status. They can look you up in a federal database. They can put you in a pipeline to deportation. And as we know, mistakes are happening, right? They're pushing toward this quota, and so mistakes are happening. And we don't want that line being blurred, so that we would like, local police should focus on local issues, protecting local communities, and not doing the federal government's job for them.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so now we'll turn it over. We've gotten a bunch of excellent questions, if you'd be willing to entertain some of these. So thanks, everyone, for your questions. And the first is, what leverage do Plymouth County voters have over the sheriff's decision to perform a federal immigration mission?
I mean, I think Plymouth County voters have maybe the most leverage of anybody in the state when it comes to influencing the decisions that the Plymouth County Sheriff is taking. So I would, I would encourage you to feel empowered by that and emboldened by that. Sheriffs are also elected officials. So, you have room to push on that, to ask tough questions, to find other candidates that are going to embrace the positions that embody your values, which I imagine many of you are not seeing lived out, on a day-to-day basis in the ways that Plymouth County Jail is complicit in the deportation machine. So, I would say, being in this room, being in this space gives me a lot of hope, because I see people who are engaged and invested and, interested in what they as individuals and, as a collective can do to change the current state of things and the current status quo. And I think that is a major way that people can engage in that decision-making process, whether it be by, finding opportunities to ask questions publicly at public forums, whether it's showing up at the Witness Wednesdays and making your voice and your bodies heard. And then, in addition, I think even calling upon like your federal senators and representatives to make unannounced visits to Plymouth to really shed more light on, what is happening there and what the conditions are there, as some of the few people who are entitled to unfettered access to those spaces. So I think those are a few things that you all in this room just like have a tremendous opportunity to use and to leverage where you are now.
And I'll remind folks that the sheriff is an elected position, as Leah said. That term is 6 years long. It is the longest term other than U.S. Senator. So there isn't another election until 2028. But Sheriff McDonald is, reports to you, the voters, right? So if you don't disagree with what he's doing, give him a call. And I'll also remind us all what happened in Bristol County in 2022 during that election, right? This became a hot issue where the sheriff there was voted out by a different candidate. Bristol was one of the other county jails that rented space to ICE. It no longer is. There were conditions issues there. The Attorney General did an investigation in Plymouth. You could also call the Attorney General and ask her to investigate the conditions at Plymouth, which I think it was really helpful to have the Attorney General, I think it was Healy at the time, investigate Bristol and find that there were some real problems there. And I think that contributed, in addition to our congressional representatives really pushing to close down that contract because of the conditions issues. So there are a lot of levers there, and I completely agree with Leah. You are the ones that have those levers.
Yes, I do recall State Auditor Suzanne Bump auditing Bristol County as well. And if you go to our website, our Witness Wednesday FAQ, our Plymouth County FAQ, frequently asked question sheet, has links to letters from Senators Warren and Markey from 2022 and 2024, and in the Biden administration, listing 70 human rights violations at Plymouth. So they're there. He puts on a good show when electeds go in, but those are there. They've actually taken them off the Department of Homeland Security website, but we do have the letters from Warren and Markey with the details. So if anyone wants to look back at those, that's helpful. Thank you. So let's actually going back to a macro view, Laura and Leah, what qualifies as due process? Is it just a court appearance, even if someone isn't here? Like, could you just offer a brief overview?
I'm reminded of a Stephen Colbert quote where he was obviously making fun of the government when they said, due process is the process we do.
That's a good one.
That's not it. That's not it. There are obviously there are constitutional rights and freedoms and liberties and guarantees that apply to everyone, whether you are a U.S. citizen, whether you are undocumented, or anything in between. And so, for example, being deprived of your liberty you are entitled to due process. And what we're seeing now is less and less of that due process. You see the case in point, for example, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? The government has admitted that he was deported as a mistake. It was a mistake. And yet they are holding on to his case. They've brought him back under these trumped-up criminal charges, and then they threatened him with being sent to Eswatini if he didn't agree to a plea. I mean, they're going back and forth because I think what's important to understand is that this isn't actually about immigrants. What we're seeing now is immigrants as a test case for ending democracy. And that sounds dark. I do believe that is the plan. Right? They want to end due process for everyone because it is highly inconvenient to, and Trump said it himself. He said, well, what do you want to have trials for 3 million people? 30? Yeah, that's what we want. Yes, we would like due process for every single person in the United States who is entitled to due process. And when it comes to your deprivation of liberty, when it comes to deportation, you are entitled to that due process. We just recently fought a case on behalf of an 18-year-old, very young man, who was caught up in this new law, the Lake and Riley Act. You may have read about it. This Congress passed it. And it eviscerates due process in that situation. So for classes of immigrants who have just been accused of certain crimes, they can be held without any due process. And we fought on behalf of this young man who had been accused of shoplifting, never faced any charges. But just that accusation of being shoplifting landed him in this permanent sort of detention without due process. And we just fought this case and were able to secure the first victory in the country, striking down the Lake and Riley Act as unconstitutional because of the due process issue. And we're going to continue to fight, right?
I think in practical terms, a lot of times, what due process translates to is time. Time to, marshal whatever resources you have at your disposal to, if that means mobilizing your community, if that means gathering money in order to be able to afford legal representation, if that means, time to get in touch with your elected officials and ask them to intervene on your behalf. I have been going back to this really fascinating, I don't use these words together very often, but like fascinating law review article about the ways that people lawyered under during the time of the Fugitive Slave Act, and the ways that lawyers used the processes themselves, the court processes, in various different creative ways to disrupt these incredibly unjust, racist, wrong laws that were in place that were tearing people out of their communities and sending them back into slavery. And so I've been thinking about that a lot when I've been thinking about what the role of lawyers is during this time. And it's really just like, how do we use every tool at our disposal? How do we leverage every part of the power that we have? How do we take every opportunity to throw sand in the gears of the machine? And I think while I'm not someone who is like super keen on this probably sounds weird coming from a lawyer. I'm not like super enamored with laws, and I think a lot of laws are not just, and I think due process is oftentimes allows you to wring the most justice out of the laws that you have, but it doesn't mean that there's going to be a just outcome. But that being said, the fact that regardless of whether or not the process is fair, due process buying you some of that time to activate other factors in the situation that might allow you to produce a more just outcome, because you have the power of your community and all of your resources and people with you.
Great, thank you. And Lori, folks are asking how they can connect with your organization.
So you can speak with myself and Kristen Thomas tonight, and we can connect you. We really, right now, are operating through emails, and we have meetings. Right now, we're doing bi-weekly meetings, forming subcommittees and groups focused on different types of mutual aid that we're providing. So you can speak with us tonight.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you. So folks can meet you afterwards. Great. I'm getting a lot of questions about warrants. So what kind of warrant does ICE have to take someone into custody, and also about the legality of picking up parents at schools and so forth?
Okay, and Leah, please correct me if I'm wrong on this. ICE doesn't always need a warrant to detain people. They often have what is called an administrative warrant or a warrant of detention or deportation. It's not a warrant that's signed by a judge. It's signed by an ICE agent, by an administrative person, and it just lays out that they have suspicion or proof that this person is deportable. So they don't always need that, though. And if they are looking for somebody with that warrant, they can pick up other people, which they call collateral arrest. It's a terrible, terrible term, but it's people in that vicinity, in that apartment building, et cetera. So as much as we would love to say ICE always needs a warrant to detain a person, that is not the law. And I think that may be shocking to people. And I think part of the problem is that our immigration laws are incredibly unjust. To Leah's point about how unenamored we are with some of the laws, immigration law has always been unjust, but it's being weaponized here. You know, some of the things we weren't seeing before, we are seeing now, and some of them are legal, right? So they don't always need a warrant to arrest a person. The important thing to know, though, and we always teach this in our Know Your Rights workshops, is that if you are in your home or in a private space that is not open to the public, and an ICE agent shows up with an administrative warrant, that doesn't give them the right to enter that private area. Whereas if it is a criminal warrant signed by a judge, it might give them, you know, you might have to open the door. If the police comes and they have a warrant for your arrest or have a warrant to search your property, you may have to open the door. When an ICE agent shows up with an administrative warrant, that doesn't give them the legal ability to enter your private space, and so they're going to rely on your consent or the consent of somebody else. And that is something that we teach in our workshop, so people know the difference and they know to ask at the door, do you have a warrant? What kind of a warrant do you have? I did bring some Know Your Rights little pamphlets. Feel free to grab some, they're on the table, about warrants. What did I miss?
I think the only other thing that comes to mind for me that I always want to share because it's as deeply unfair as it sounds, but it's really important to remember, which is that like ICE and the police can lie to you, and you're not allowed to lie to them. So keeping that in mind, you know, throughout that entire sequence of events, between ICE or the police knocking on your door to you opening your door or not opening your door, is like, yeah, keeping that in mind, right? That these are people who have the ability to not be completely truthful and forthcoming with you, and so that's why it's so important to actually see the warrant that is being used as the basis to enter this private space, detain someone, take someone into custody. Because you can't always rely on that agent's word alone.
Great. Another question. Local immigrant communities have told us they prefer that Plymouth County Detention Center not to be closed so that they can stay in contact with the detained family members and support them while they're being held close to home. Shouldn't we respect their wishes?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. That's a point that comes up often, and it's not one that I take lightly. A few things that I want to add to that conversation, and then I'll just close with kind of my thinking around it. One thing that I want to add as far as context is that there have always been people getting transferred into and out of Plymouth and moved around the country at the whim of ICE. And now more than ever, we're really seeing how individual detention centers fit into, sorry, I'm backing away from the mic, how individual detention centers fit into this broader web and machinery of, pulling as many people into the system as possible and moving them around as quickly as possible so that they're not able to find legal counsel and not able to remain in contact with their families. And so I think that is an important kind of just baseline aspect of the immigration detention system that is worth bearing in mind no matter where someone is detained. The second thing that I will add is that having the hundreds and hundreds of beds near more dense, urbanized, immigrant-rich communities means that there is the ability to pull more people into the system and send them wherever, ICE wants. So the more beds that are available for ICE to fill, the more people ICE can pick up, put in those beds, and then those people in turn get moved into the system no matter where they end up. And this is how the immigration detention system continues expanding. And so those are two very system-wide kind of abstract ways of thinking about immigration detention. The hard thing is that that's not the only plane on which it exists, right? There's also this very individual and personal dimension of it that oftentimes conflicts with some of the more systemic ways that we want to tackle and weaken and shrink the immigration detention system. And that is the reality that Jen is speaking to, and that you all are also privy to, which is that when there are not detention beds nearby, the people who are detained, some of them are going to be moved to farther away places. So it's this kind of push-pull between we want the people who are in the system or are inevitably going to end up in the system to have every opportunity at their disposal to fight the strongest fight that they can to win their cases. And we want as few people being pulled into the system as possible. And those things are in tension with each other. And I'm not going to tell you that they're not. That's a very real tension that we hold as attorneys, that people who are working at bigger picture levels and attorneys who are working on more direct representation individual levels are constantly in tension about. And so as far as kind of how I reconcile those things in my own work, I really look to take leadership and take direction from people who are inside the detention centers and the communities on the ground here in Massachusetts. And though neither of those spaces are monolithic, and neither of those spaces are entirely uniform in the ways that they relate to the detention system and the fact that Plymouth exists. I've had numerous people who are detained at Plymouth tell me, I want this place shut down. Nobody should be detained here. And I've also had people express the anxiety of being sent somewhere else. And I just want to close this by naming that this is a position, this is not a naturally existing position that we're put in. This is the position and these are the conditions that ICE is creating. None of this has to be the case, right? These are decisions that we're being forced into by an incredibly violent system, and ultimately, it is up to us to decide how we stand with each other and how we attack that system with whatever tools we have at our disposal. And that might look different year to year and month to month. So all we can do is do the best that we can, and look to folks who are most impacted for their leadership as far as what they think needs to happen.
Thank you.
Can I just with that, on that point, because I have been working with the immigration community here, and there's been an expression that if there could be a promise to keep the people that are detained in Plymouth and not moved, then there is a preference for that. But I don't know if that's possible, if that's just a dream at this point, how realistic it is. So if you could speak to the reality of that desire, and also, I know you already spoke to the reality of how quickly people are moving from Plymouth. So could you speak to that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is one of the core features of the violence of the immigration detention system, is that it is federal in scale. It is, particularly at this moment, ever expanding. Is always taking on more money and creating more beds and spreading its web wider. And once you're in that system, you really, short of a few very specific legal levers that can, under very certain circumstances, be used, you're subject to the whims of wherever ICE wants to send you. And so, to answer your question, there isn't a way to force ICE to keep everybody in the same place. And I understand that is not it's not an answer that I'm satisfied with. It's not an answer that anybody should be satisfied with. And I think that, it's something to keep in mind as we're continuing to grapple with what it means to challenge this system effectively.
Laura?
And I'll just add that, first of all, that was so beautifully said, what you said earlier. Thank you so much for standing in that tension that is so real. At the end of the day, we don't want to build more jails. We want more people to be free, right? But there is that tension of the day-to-day and the people who are affected at an individual level versus the macro level. But there's a really, I think, important article of the Washington Post where they just did reporting around the expansion of detention. And so, as I said before, we were at about 40,000 daily beds at the beginning of this year, and they are going to be hitting 107,000. We were at 40,000, and they're going to be hitting 107,000 beds by the end of this year. And what does that look like? That looks like a 3,700 bed facility in Reeves County, Texas, a 3,500 bed facility in Brownsville, Texas. Spoiler alert, these are all in southern states and in Florida, right? And including what they call soft-sided facilities, which are not real buildings. They're like tents material, right? Places that are not meant really to be living in. And so and then there's the private facilities, right? The GEO group is just making gazillions of dollars off of these contracts. They are rapidly expanding detention all over the country in order to meet these quotas and to deport as many people as possible. And so there's this rapidly changing dynamic of what does even Plymouth mean in this gigantic system where people not only do they not have to stay in Massachusetts, they don't even have to ever touch foot at Plymouth County Jail. Only a fraction of people who are arrested here wind up at Plymouth, right? A lot of them get flown very quickly to other states. And I'll just very quickly talk about Rumeysa Ozturk, who you probably read about, this young student who was ripped off of the street in Somerville. She was quickly moved all over New England and was in Louisiana within 24 hours, I believe, of her arrest. She would never stayed. She was not in Burlington. She was never here in Massachusetts, and that was by design. They said that in court, that it was by design that she would be in Louisiana as quickly as possible because it wasn't about her immigration status, it was about her speech. And so they're using this to silence dissent, to go after people who don't agree, and as test cases for everybody else.
Great, thank you.
One more thing that I just wanted to kind of tie into this conversation about detention expansion and growth and shutting places down. I think it's really important to recognize the connection between like carceral expansion in any form and the expansion of the immigration detention system. And what I mean by that is that we see constantly these cycles of prisons or jails being shut down, either because they are like the conditions are terrible and they're shut down by force, or because there aren't enough people to lock up, and it just becomes like the county or the state is like, well, this actually isn't worth keeping open anymore. We see this constant cycle where emptied out prisons and jails are being like picked up and repurposed into ICE detention centers. And I think this is something that is really crucial for us to keep in mind as we think about our own like carceral infrastructure here in Massachusetts. And so thinking about the $360 million women's prison that has been proposed, and the ways that Families for Justice as Healing and so many other organizations here in Massachusetts are saying we don't want more money going into building more prisons and more jails. And thinking about like once you create a space that is meant to cage people, it is incredibly difficult to take that space out of circulation once it's been created. And we see this all the time between the prison system and the ICE detention system. And so that is one really clear and tangible like thing that we can all get behind to say, regardless of what this space is being used for, we don't want it here in Massachusetts.
Great, thank you.
There was a story of it in Cumberland County, I want to say Maine, right? Cumberland County, where ICE arrested a person who was on his way to work at Cumberland County Jail. Because these jails create jobs, right? Our carceral system creates jobs. And because they didn't have enough people to fill those jobs, they lowered the English requirement. And so there were more immigrants who were working at Cumberland County Jail, which also rents space to ICE. And this man was arrested by ICE on his way to work.
Wow.
As I think, corrections officer or some sort of staff at the jail.
Well, thank you. Well, we do want to say thank you so much to our panelists. We really honor what you're doing in the world, so thank you. We are deeply grateful for you being here tonight and everything you do every day, and we're glad to be in partnership with you. And we welcome everyone to come to Witness Wednesday this Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m., and also join us at our lobby day next Thursday. So with that, thank you again to the League of Women Voters of Plymouth for all their hard work. Thank you. So, thank you and good night, everyone.